"Do not let the Omega touch my wolf," Alpha King Everett Hale said. 1 second before his royal wolf sneezed, rolled onto its back, and dragged itself 3 feet closer to her boots like a dying actor begging for applause. The entire training yard went silent. Not politely silent. Horrified silent. The kind of silence that made every guard suddenly interested in the stone wall, the clouds, or their own poor life choices. Grace Ellery stood at the edge of Northvale Palace's white courtyard with her medicine satchel in one hand and mud on the hem of her gray work dress. She had been pulled out of the animal clinic before breakfast by 2 royal guards who claimed the king's wolf was suffering a dangerous allergic reaction. Dangerous, apparently, meant lying in the sun with one paw lifted dramatically and one golden eye cracked open just enough to see if Grace had arrived. Around the wolf stood 3 palace physicians, 6 armed guards, 2 nervous betas, and High Elder Malcolm Voss, who looked as if someone had personally offended the dignity of government. At the center of all that panic was Briar, the Alpha King's wolf, a massive black and silver beast with enough muscle to scare a war horse and enough commitment to embarrass a theater troupe. He gave another weak sneeze. Grace looked at him. Briar looked back, then shut his eyes very quickly. "How long has he been like this?" she asked. One of the physicians cleared his throat. 22 minutes. "And what was he doing before the symptoms began?" Nobody answered. That told Grace plenty. She stepped closer. The guards shifted, hands tightening around weapons they clearly hoped they would not have to use. Everett Hale stood above them on the north steps, dressed in black, his crown absent, but his authority very much not. He had the kind of face people lowered their voices around. Cold gray eyes. Sharp jaw. A stillness that made the whole pack seem to breathe around him instead of with him. "Miss Ellery," he said, voice low enough to make the younger wolf straighten. "You were called to treat him, not interview the courtyard." Grace crouched beside Briar, close enough to smell clean fur, palace cedar, and something faintly sharp beneath it. "Not illness. Not fear. I interview all my patients," she said, "especially the ones lying." Briar's ear twitched. A guard made a sound and swallowed it. Grace opened her satchel and pulled out a small tin of mint balm. Briar's nose wiggled before she even touched him. Interesting. She held the balm to his muzzle. No swelling. No rash. No labored breathing. His pulse was fast, but not from distress. From excitement. Grace sat back on her heels. "Your Majesty," she said, keeping her voice calm because the truth was already rude enough. "Your wolf is not having an allergic reaction." Everett's eyes narrowed. "Then explain the sneezing." Briar sneezed again, softer this time, and nudged his nose against Grace's knee. Grace looked down at him, then up at the Alpha King. "He's faking it." The courtyard froze. Somewhere, very far away, a raven called like it wanted to be included in the scandal. Elder Voss's mouth tightened. "That is a serious accusation against a royal wolf." "No," Grace said. "It's a simple diagnosis." Briar gave one more tragic sniffle and placed his enormous head directly on her boot. Everett descended the steps slowly, each footfall measured, controlled, royal. But his wolf did not look controlled at all. Briar's tail moved once against the stone, quick and pleased, before he remembered he was supposed to be near death. Grace noticed. Everett noticed her noticing. For a moment their eyes met, and something under Grace's ribs pulled tight, warm and sudden, like a thread catching on a nail. Briar went completely still. Everett did too. The air changed. Every wolf in the yard felt it, even if nobody dared name it. Grace stood too fast. "I'll prepare a tonic," she said. "For what?" Everett asked. She looked at the royal wolf, who was now pretending to sneeze into her skirt. "For bad acting." The private wolf court was supposed to be quiet, which in palace language meant 10 guards, 2 physicians, 1 exhausted beta, and a king pretending he had not just been publicly outmaneuvered by his own animal. Grace stood beside the marble basin with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, lining up 3 simple tests on a silver tray: dried clover, mint balm, and a strip of clean cotton. Briar sat in the middle of the room like a monument to innocence. He had the posture of a royal guardian and the eyes of a dog who had eaten pie off a windowsill and blamed weather. Everett Hale watched from 6 feet away, arms folded, face carved into that cold royal calm people probably mistook for wisdom when they did not know better. "He has never behaved this way before," Everett said. His beta, Callum Reed, made a small coughing sound that did not belong to illness. Grace glanced at him. Callum suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. "Your Majesty," Grace said, "that was not a cough. That was a man with history." Everett did not move. "My wolf is disciplined." Briar immediately lowered his massive head and nudged Grace's hand until her fingers landed between his ears. The room went painfully still. Grace looked down at the wolf. "Subtle." Briar sneezed. Once. Softly. Directly into her apron. One of the physicians whispered, "Remarkable." Grace gave him a look. "It is not remarkable. It is manipulative." Briar's tail swept across the floor with the quiet satisfaction of someone accepting a compliment. Everett stepped closer, and the air changed before his boots crossed the first seam in the stone. Grace felt it under her skin, not frightening exactly, but deep, like thunder far behind mountains. Alpha presence. Royal blood. Pack command. Every wolf in Northvale would know that pressure and lower their eyes without thinking. Grace did not lower hers fast enough. Everett noticed. Worse, Briar noticed and looked pleased. "Begin the test," Everett said. Grace held the clover near Briar's muzzle. No reaction. She brushed mint balm along the edge of his nose. Nothing. She touched the cotton strip to his fur. Still nothing. Then she stepped back. Briar gave a tragic, trembling sneeze and leaned after her, as if separation itself had attacked his sinuses. Callum closed his eyes. "There it is." Everett shot him a look. "Do not help." Grace folded the cotton strip. "The pattern is clear." "Which is?" Everett asked. "He reacts when I stop touching him." The nearest guard pressed his lips together so hard Grace respected the effort. Everett looked at his wolf with the expression of a king discovering treason in the family. "Briar." The wolf turned his head away with great dignity and placed one paw over Grace's boot. Grace felt the pull again, sharper this time, a warm thread tugging from her chest toward Everett and then down through the wolf. Her breath caught before she could hide it. Everett's jaw tightened. He had felt it too. For 1 second, the room was not marble, medicine, or hierarchy. It was just the three of them connected by something old enough that no council had invented a rule for it. Grace gently removed her foot from under Briar's paw. "This is not an allergy," she said more quietly. "This is bond stress." Everett's face closed. "You are not qualified to diagnose my bond." "No," Grace said. "But he is." Briar leaned his head against her knee, all royal power and ridiculous need. Grace softened despite herself. "He is not trying to embarrass you," Callum muttered. "Not only trying." Grace continued before Everett could glare him into dust. "He is trying to get your attention. And mine." Everett looked at Briar, then at Grace, and for the first time his coldness slipped just enough to show the fear underneath. "Why yours?" Grace opened her mouth, but Briar sneezed into her apron again, perfectly timed and deeply unhelpful. The answer hung between them anyway, warm, dangerous, and impossible to name. Grace was halfway through washing Briar's fake sneeze off her apron when a royal guard appeared at the clinic door and said, with the haunted face of a man delivering bad news before coffee, "His Majesty requests your presence in the East Treatment Room." Grace looked at the clock. "It is almost midnight." The guard swallowed. "Yes, Miss Ellery. Does the king know wolves can be dramatic during business hours?" The guard did not smile, but his left eye considered it. 10 minutes later, Grace entered the East Treatment Room with her satchel, her hair pinned badly, and her patients packed somewhere near the bottom. Everett stood by the tall windows, moonlight cutting silver across his black shirt. Briar lay on the rug beside him, looking far too pleased for a patient under royal observation. Callum Reed was there too, holding a stack of reports and the expression of a beta who had given up on peace as a life goal. "This is not treatment," Everett said before Grace could speak. "This is a controlled assessment of potential bond instability." Grace set her satchel on the table. "That is a very expensive way to say treatment." Callum lowered his reports to hide his mouth. Everett ignored him. "You said my wolf is experiencing bond stress. Explain." Grace knelt beside Briar, and the wolf immediately rolled his head into her palm. "He is not sick. He is not allergic. He is not confused. He is trying to force contact because contact calms the bond." Everett's face hardened. "My bond does not require calming." Briar sneezed once, sharp and judgmental. Grace looked at him. "Thank you." She placed both hands along Briar's neck, just behind the heavy line of muscle where wolf met power. The moment her fingers settled, the room seemed to tilt. Not visibly. Nothing moved. But something under the air opened, cold and bright. Grace felt Everett on the other side of it. Not his thoughts, not his secrets, but the shape of him. Discipline layered over exhaustion. Command wrapped around fear. A wolf bond pulled too tight for too many years. She inhaled too quickly. Everett's hand caught the edge of the table. What did you do? Nothing. Grace closed her eyes, following the sensation. It ran through Briar like a cracked bell, beautiful and damaged at the same time. No, not nothing. Someone taught you to treat your wolf like an enemy. Callum went still. Everett's voice dropped. Be careful. Grace opened her eyes. I am being careful. That is why I am saying it plainly. Briar pressed closer to her knee, and the bond shivered again. Images did not come, but feelings did. A young alpha standing alone in a training ring. A father's voice like winter stone. Control it. Break it. Rule it before it rules you. Grace pulled her hands back, but the ache stayed in her chest. Everett looked away first. That told her more than any confession could. Your wolf is not trying to shame you, she said softly. He is trying to survive you. The words landed hard. Callum stopped breathing for half a second. Everett did not shout. Somehow, that made it worse. You know nothing about what a king survives. Grace stood slowly. No, but I know what an animal does when it has been ignored too long. It gets louder. Briar gave a miserable little sneeze into her sleeve. Grace sighed, sometimes very louder. Everett's mouth almost moved. Almost. Then Grace caught a scent beneath the mint balm and clean fur. Bitter. Metallic. Herbal. Wrong. She bent toward Briar's ruff and found a dusting of pale silver powder caught near his collar strap. Her stomach tightened. Who handled him before the courtyard? Everett's eyes sharpened. Why? Grace rubbed the powder between her fingers. It shimmered under the moonlight like frost ground into ash. Because this is not allergy dust. And it did not come from him. Briar stopped pretending. Everett stepped closer. For the first time all night, the king looked less embarrassed than afraid. By sunrise, the silver powder had stopped being a medical problem and become a political one, which meant everyone in Northvale Palace suddenly had opinions and none of them were useful. Grace stood outside the council chamber with Briar pressed against her side, pretending not to lean on her while absolutely leaning on her. The wolf had been brushed clean 3 times, checked twice, and scolded once for stealing a biscuit from Callum Reed's breakfast plate. He accepted the scolding with the grave patience of a monarch hearing weather reports. Behind the double doors, voices rose and fell in clipped, careful tones. Elders never shouted. Shouting was for people without expensive chairs. Everett had ordered the courtyard sealed, the collar strap locked away, and every stable worker questioned before noon. Grace should have been grateful. Instead, she could still feel the cold edge of what he had not said. He had not said he trusted her. He had not said she was in danger. He had not said that when the bond pulled tight between them last night, he had felt it too. The doors opened. Callum stepped out first, his brown hair rumpled like he had already fought 3 arguments and lost 2 to paperwork. Miss Ellery, he said quietly, they want you inside. Grace glanced at Briar. Do they want him inside? Briar sneezed, cleanly and with excellent timing. Callum sighed. Apparently, he invited himself. The council chamber was built to make people feel small. High windows, black stone floor, banners of old pack victories, and a long crescent table where the elders sat above everyone else by exactly 3 steps, because power loved architecture. Everett stood at the center beneath the Northvale crest, one hand behind his back, his expression calm enough to worry anyone paying attention. High Elder Malcolm Voss sat at the center of the table in dark blue robes, silver hair smooth, fingers folded. Beside him stood Lady Marin Vale, beautiful in winter white, with a smile polished so carefully Grace could almost see the knife marks underneath. Miss Ellery, Voss said, as if her name had dirt on it. You have had unusual access to the royal wolf. Grace stopped 10 feet from the table. Briar stopped with her. I was called because he was supposedly sick. And yet his condition worsened after your arrival. Briar made a low offended sound. Grace touched 2 fingers to his shoulder before he could turn royal politics into furniture damage. His condition was staged. By whom? Voss asked. That is what we are trying to find out. Convenient. Lady Marin's voice was soft enough to pass for kindness in a room full of people who did not value kindness. A low-rank Omega appears, the royal wolf becomes attached, the Alpha King's bond becomes unstable, and now there is mystery powder only she can identify. Grace felt the words land exactly where they were aimed. Not at her skill, at her place, her birth, her lack of a family name anyone at that table cared to remember. Everett's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. Royal duty, Grace thought. The phrase tasted bitter. Voss leaned forward. Until this matter is resolved, Miss Ellery should be removed from all treatment duties involving the royal wolf. Briar's ears flattened. Everett finally spoke. That is not necessary. It is necessary, Voss said. The pack must see its king is not ruled by a healer from the outer kennels. The chamber went still. Grace looked at Everett. For one foolish heartbeat, she expected him to end it. Not with anger, not with drama, just truth. Instead, he looked at the elders, then at Briar, then at her, and Grace watched a wall slide back over his face. For the stability of Northvale, Everett said, each word controlled to the point of pain. Miss Ellery will temporarily step away from direct care. Briar growled once, quiet and broken-hearted. Grace did not. She only reached up, unpinned the small brass healer badge from her collar, and set it on the nearest table. Of course, Your Majesty, she said. I would hate to become inconvenient to the throne. Everett's eyes flickered. Too late. Grace turned to leave, and Briar sneezed after her, but this time it did not sound fake at all. Grace made it all the way to the outer kennel gate before her hands started shaking, which annoyed her more than the council had. She had held down frightened horses, stitched up wolf pups during thunderstorms, and once removed a fishhook from a royal hound while the hound's owner prayed loudly to 4 different saints. She did not shake, but the brass healer badge was no longer on her collar, and the place where it had rested felt colder than it should have. Behind her, Northvale Palace rose white and severe against the morning sky, all towers, banners, and polished lies. Grace kept walking. If she stopped, she might look back. If she looked back, she might remember Everett standing beneath the pack crest, choosing silence with his whole kingdom watching. Callum caught up to her just past the herb sheds, breathing hard. Grace. She did not turn. If you are here to explain royal duty, I charge by the minute. I am here because he hated doing that. Grace laughed once, small and humorless. That must have been terrible for him. Callum winced. Voss would have called for a stability vote if Everett refused. The smaller packs are nervous. The border alphas are waiting for weakness. If the council brands Briar unstable, they can force a political mating before the next full moon. Grace finally turned. So, I was the easier sacrifice. Callum had no quick answer. That was the problem with decent men. They made silence look guilty. Grace adjusted the strap of her satchel. Tell His Majesty his wolf needs clean water, no clover hay, and no one near that collar strap until I test the powder. You know you are not allowed to test it now. I know many things I am not allowed to do. She walked away before he could decide whether that was a promise or a warning. By afternoon, she was back in the small animal clinic outside the palace wall, where the roof leaked over the storage cabinet and nobody bowed unless they wanted medicine flavored with guilt. She should have felt relieved. Instead, every sound made her think of Briar. Every draft carried cedar, mint, and the impossible warmth of Everett's bond brushing against hers like a question neither of them had permission to ask. At sunset, a palace runner came with official paperwork. Temporary removal from royal treatment duties. Restricted access to palace animals. Pending review by the Elder Council. Everett's signature sat at the bottom, black ink, perfect lines, no hesitation visible. Grace stared at it for a long moment. Then she folded the paper and used it to level the crooked leg of her work table. Useful at last, she said. The goat on the treatment mat sneezed in agreement. Night settled cold over Northvale. Grace was grinding willow bark when something struck her window with a soft tap. A black feather slid down the glass. Then another. She opened the door and found one of the royal falcons perched on the fence, silver eyes bright, a strip of dark cloth tied around its leg. You are not supposed to be here, Grace said. The falcon blinked, deeply unimpressed by human law. Grace untied the cloth. It was torn from a stable sleeve, stiff at the edge with pale dust. The same bitter metallic scent rose from it. Silver herb powder. Under the scent was something else. Cheap soap, hay smoke, and fear. Grace knew that smell. A stable boy named Owen Pike had carried Briar's water before the courtyard incident. Owen had been questioned by palace guards that morning. By noon, he had disappeared. Grace looked toward the palace lights beyond the wall, her anger settling into something colder and much more useful. Fine, she whispered, folding the cloth into her satchel. If the throne wants me outside the gates, I will start where the gates stop watching. The royal falcon led Grace to the old service road like it owned the moon and was only allowing her to borrow it. Grace followed with her satchel tight across her shoulder, boots sinking into the wet grass beyond the palace wall. Northvale looked different from the outside at night. Less like a crown, more like a locked mouth. Every tower had a guard light. Every gate had 2 wolves posted. Every path said the same thing without words. People like you enter when called and leave when dismissed. Grace kept walking anyway. The falcon landed on a broken fence rail near the east delivery lane and clicked its beak. I am coming, Grace whispered. Some of us have legs shorter than a royal attitude. A low whine answered from the shadows. Grace froze. Then a gray palace hound stepped into the road, old, scarred, and carrying a strip of rope in his teeth. Benson. The hound had belonged to the laundry wing for 11 years and obeyed no one except kitchen workers holding ham. He dropped the rope at her feet and limped toward the abandoned kennel wall. Grace picked it up. The fibers smelled like hay smoke, cheap soap, and silver herb powder. Owen Pike. She followed Benson through a gap behind the feed sheds, past stacked crates and a frozen water pump, until they reached a storage room built into the old kennel foundation. The door was locked. The falcon stared at her. Benson stared at her. From under the steps, Juniper, the palace stable cat, appeared with the smug look of someone who had never respected locks. She slipped through a crack, knocked something over inside, and the latch popped loose. Grace looked at all 3 animals. I hope everyone understands this is not legally helpful. The room smelled of straw, dust, and secrets that had waited too long. Grace lit a small lantern and searched the shelves. Old grooming brushes, cracked leather leads, broken feed scoops. Then Benson scratched at a loose board under the far wall. Grace pried it open with her hoof pick and found 3 cloth bags tucked behind the stone. Pale powder shimmered inside them, silver as ground frost. Her stomach went tight. She took one careful sample, then another from the rope, then another from the torn sleeve cloth. All the same, not a true poison. Worse in some ways. A bond irritant. Enough to make a wolf restless, sensitive, desperate for the one presence that steadied him. Enough to make affection look like instability and instinct look like madness. Behind the bag sat a folded note sealed with dark blue wax. Grace held it near the lantern. The seal was broken, but the mark remained. Elder Voss. The words were short and ugly. Increase exposure before Crown Moon Assembly. The king must fail publicly. Grace sat back on her heels. For 1 second, the room felt too small. Then Juniper rubbed against her knee like facts were facts and panic was poor manners. Grace folded the note into her satchel. You are right, she said to the cat. We can fall apart later. A sound came from outside. Not a guard. Softer. A boy trying not to cry. Grace opened the door and found Owen Pike crouched behind the empty grain bins. Pale, shaking, no older than 19. I did not know what it was, he whispered before she could ask. They said it was flea dust. Elder Voss said if I refused, my mother would lose her place in the South Cottages. Grace crouched a few feet away, keeping her voice steady. Owen, I need you to tell the truth where people can hear it. He shook his head. They will bury me. Not if I get to the king first. The boy looked toward the palace. Then hurry. They moved the assembly to dawn. Grace ran. Not gracefully. Not quietly. She ran through the delivery lane, past the herb sheds, through a laundry passage Benson somehow opened by leaning on it with his entire elderly body. By the time she reached the lower hall of the throne wing, her lungs burned and the bond in her chest pulled so hard she nearly stumbled. At the end of the corridor, the throne room doors stood half open. Everett was inside alone, one hand braced on the black stone table, shoulders rigid. Briar paced at his side, no longer acting, no longer sneezing for attention. The wolf was fighting something real. Everett lifted his head as Grace stepped into the doorway with silver powder on her gloves and proof in her satchel. His voice came out rough. You should not be here. Grace looked at Briar, then at the king who had tried to lose her for her own safety. I know, she said. I came anyway. Everett looked like a man holding a door shut against a storm only he could feel. His fingers were pressed hard into the black stone table, his breathing controlled in that terrible royal way that turned pain into posture. Briar paced beside him, claws clicking against the floor, each circle tighter than the last. The wolf was not performing now. There was no clever sneeze, no dramatic paw, no stolen biscuit smile hiding in his golden eyes. His fur stood along his shoulders, and every few seconds he shook his head like something bitter was crawling under his skin. Grace stepped inside and closed the throne room door behind her. How much exposure? She asked. Everett's eyes went to the silver dust on her gloves. Enough. That is not a medical answer. I am not your patient. Briar snapped his head toward him and sneezed so hard the sound echoed off the old banners. Grace pointed at the wolf. He disagrees. For one dangerous second, Everett almost smiled. Then the bond twisted, and the smile died before it was born. He gripped the table again. You need to leave. Grace walked closer instead. You keep saying that like it has ever worked. Voss moved the assembly to dawn. The elders are already gathering. If they see Briar like this, they will call for a stability vote. I know. No, Grace, you do not. His voice broke around her name, not loudly, but enough that the room seemed to hear it. If they decide I cannot govern my wolf, they can bind the throne to a council-approved mate before the next full moon. They can strip protections from the outer packs. They can remove anyone considered a weakness. His eyes held hers, raw beneath the cold. That means you. The answer landed softer than she expected and hurt worse because of it. Grace set her satchel on the table. So that was your plan? Push me outside the gates and hope politics forgot my face. I was trying to keep you alive. You were trying to make a choice for me without asking. Everett looked away. Briar stopped pacing and pressed his head against Grace's hip, trembling. The bond flared between the three of them, warm at the center, sharp at the edges. Grace pulled out a small vial of binding oil, crushed fever leaf, and a clean strip of cotton. I can calm him long enough for the assembly. Everett turned back fast. At what cost? A headache. Maybe worse. Grace. Do not use that voice like I am a glass cup on a high shelf. She soaked the cotton and laid one hand against Briar's neck. The wolf leaned into her with a sound so tired it nearly broke her. Grace drew a slow breath and followed the crack in the bond the way her father had once taught her to follow a frightened animal through dark woods. Do not chase. Do not force. Make yourself steady and let it come home. The pain hit behind her ribs first, cold and metallic. She swallowed it down. Everett stepped toward her. Stop. No, that is an order. Grace looked up at him through the strain. Then you should have hired someone who cared more about orders. Briar's shaking eased. The air around Everett loosened, inch by inch. But Grace's knees weakened, and the room blurred at the edges. Everett caught her before she touched the floor. Not like a king saving face. Like a man who had forgotten there was anyone watching in the world. His arms were steady, his heartbeat anything but. Grace tried to push herself upright. I am fine. You are a terrible liar. You would know. Briar gave one small, exhausted sneeze into Everett's sleeve. The throne room doors opened before anyone could speak. Callum stood there, pale and breathless. Behind him, the first bell of the crown moon assembly rang through the palace. Your Majesty, he said, Voss has begun without you. Everett looked at Grace, then at Briar, then toward the sound of the pack gathering to judge him. For the first time since Grace had met him, the Alpha King did not hide the fear in his eyes. Then he helped her stand and said, low enough that only she could hear, this time, I am not leaving you outside the room. The Crown Moon assembly filled the old hall from wall to wall, and every person inside knew they were not there to witness justice. They were there to watch power change hands politely. Elders sat beneath silver banners. Border alphas stood with their arms folded. Noble families whispered behind gloved hands. At the center of the crescent table, High Elder Malcolm Voss looked calm enough to make Grace want to throw her satchel at him. Lady Marin Vale stood at his right side in a white coat trimmed with pale fur, beautiful, still, and already dressed like the future the council had chosen for Everett. Voss lifted his voice as Everett entered with Grace at his side, and Briar walking free behind them. The king arrives late to the assembly called for his own stability. A murmur moved through the hall. Everett did not answer immediately. He looked down at Grace, not for permission, not for rescue, but as if reminding himself she was actually inside the room this time. Then he faced the elders. You began early. Voss smiled. Northvale cannot wait on a wolf that cannot be controlled. Briar sneezed once, dry and annoyed. The sound bounced through the hall with terrible timing. Someone in the back coughed into his fist. Grace almost respected Briar for maintaining his brand under pressure. Voss pointed toward her. This Omega was removed from royal treatment duties. Yet she appears beside the throne with the royal wolf following her like a house pet. What more proof does the pack require? Grace stepped forward before Everett could shield her. Her legs still felt weak from calming the bond, but weakness was not the same as fear. She placed the cloth bag of silver powder on the stone table, then the torn sleeve, then the rope, then the note with the blue wax seal. You wanted proof, she said. There it is. One elder leaned in. What is this substance? A bond irritant, Grace said. Not poison, not medicine. It agitates the wolf bond. It makes a bonded wolf restless, reactive, and desperate for the one presence that steadies him. Lady Marin's smile thinned. Convenient that the one presence is yours. Grace looked at her. Yes, almost like someone counted on that. The hall shifted. Voss laughed softly. A kennel healer with a dramatic theory. An animal apothecary, Grace corrected. And a better nose than your entire investigation. Callum stepped forward with Owen Pike beside him. The stable boy looked terrified, but he stood. Elder Voss told me it was flea dust, Owen said, voice shaking. He said to put it on the collar strap before the courtyard inspection and again before the assembly. Voss stood so fast his chair scraped stone. This boy is lying to save himself. Briar moved then. Not with rage, not with threat, just certainty. He walked past Everett, past Lady Marin, past the elders who had spent all morning debating his mind like he was a broken lock. He stopped in front of Grace. The hall went silent before he even lowered his head. Every wolf in Northvale knew the old law. The royal wolf bowed only to the person it recognized as safe to the crown, safe to the bond, and chosen beyond politics. Briar bent his massive head until his brow touched the floor at Grace's muddy boots. The silence broke into stunned whispers. Grace forgot how to breathe. Everett stepped beside her, his voice carrying through the hall without needing to rise. Grace Ellery did not weaken my wolf. She found the hand that tried to weaken him. He looked at Voss, and she did what this council failed to do. She protected the bond of Northvale. Voss's face lost color. Lady Marin took one careful step away from him, already separating herself from a losing side. Then Voss looked at Grace with hatred sharpened by panic. Ask her, he said. Ask why her father's name was erased from the palace records. Grace went cold. Everett turned to her. The room tilted around the words. Voss smiled like a man throwing one last match into dry grass. This powder did not begin with your king, Miss Ellery. Your father found it first. Voss's words did what the silver powder had never managed to do. They made the entire hall stop breathing. Grace stood beside the stone table with Briar bowed at her feet, and for one terrible second, she was not in the Crown Moon assembly anymore. She was 8 years old again, sitting at a kitchen table while her mother burned letters in the stove and said, very softly, some truths survive better if they hide. Everett saw the color leave her face. He reached out, not grabbing, not claiming, just offering steadiness in front of everyone who had once called her too low to matter. Grace took one breath, then another. Say his name, she said to Voss. The elder blinked. What? My father had a name. Her voice shook, but it did not break. If you are going to use him as a weapon, have the courage to say his name. Voss's mouth tightened. Daniel Ellery was a bond healer who betrayed palace confidence. No, Everett said. One word. Quiet. Final. He turned to Callum. The sealed archive. Callum stepped forward with a thin black ledger, the kind of record old governments kept when they expected no one honest to open it. Everett broke the ribbon himself. He read the page, and with every line his face changed, not into anger, but into something heavier. Shame with a crown on it. Daniel Ellery reported illegal use of silver herb compounds on royal wolves 20 years ago, Everett said. He named 3 elders. One of them was Malcolm Voss. The hall shifted like the floor had moved beneath it. Voss reached for control, but control had finally found better company. Owen Pike testified again. The physicians confirmed Grace's samples. Callum placed the collar strap beside the powder. One by one, the lies that had stood tall for 2 decades became small enough to hold in a paper bag. Everett did not roar. He did not make a show of power. He simply stripped Voss of his seat before the pack, froze his authority, and ordered every erased healer's record reopened by sunrise. That was the first time Grace understood what real strength looked like on an Alpha King. Not domination, not fear, responsibility. Afterward, when the hall had emptied and the old banners hung quietly above them, Everett stood with Grace beneath the Northvale crest. "I cannot give back what this throne took from your family," he said. "No," Grace answered. "You cannot." He accepted that without flinching. "But I can make sure it stops taking from people who cannot fight a council alone." Grace looked at him then, truly looked. The man who had chosen silence had finally chosen truth, and truth had cost him comfort, allies, and the easy respect of people who preferred obedient kings. "That is a start," she said. Briar, who had been noble for almost 7 full minutes, sneezed into Everett's sleeve with obvious fraud. Grace closed her eyes. "He is doing it again." Everett looked down at his wolf, then back at her, and the almost smile finally arrived. "I am beginning to think he learned persistence from you, and bad timing from you." The next week, Daniel Ellery's name was restored to the palace wall. Grace's brass healer badge was returned, polished so brightly it looked new, though she knew better than most that polished things could still carry old pain. She accepted the post of Royal Wolf Bond Healer, not because the crown gave her dignity, but because she had brought her dignity with her and made the crown recognize it. Northvale did not become fair overnight. Pax never did. Power rarely apologized without being cornered by evidence, witnesses, and one extremely dramatic wolf. But a door opened. Omega healers walked through it. Stable boys spoke without lowering their heads. And Alpha King Everett Hale learned that loyalty was not silence around the throne. Loyalty was telling the truth before the throne hurt someone else. In the snow garden, Briar rested his head on Grace's boot, perfectly healthy and completely shameless. Everett stood beside her, not in front of her. That mattered. Grace touched the wolf's ear and looked toward the palace lights. Love, she thought, was not being chosen in secret. It was being stood beside in public, when the whole pack was watching and the cost was real.